Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about assessing the wide receiver market in Dynasty leagues. Now, this is a really tough thing to do because every single wide receiver is playing in a different system. And in these different systems, we are looking at very different opportunities for different players. Let's go ahead and look at the Tampa Bay Bucks and the Chicago Bears as an example. Last year, the Tampa Bay Bucks attempted 751 pass attempts, and the Chicago Bears attempted 377. The Tampa Bay Bucks were 3 pass attempts away from literally doubling the volume that the Chicago Bears passing offense had. The Buccaneers supported 2 wide receivers with over 125 targets. They had a running back with 83 targets, and they had 3 other players surpass 50 targets each. Looking at the Chicago Bears, they only had 2 guys that surpassed 50 targets, and that was Cole Kmet with 69 and Darnell Mooney with 61. In addition to more volume, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers pass catchers had the added benefit of getting more accurate pass attempts from Tom Brady as opposed to some of the errant throws we saw from Justin Fields. So trying to compare players between 2 systems like this is a fool's errand. So what we do in Dynasty leagues, rather than trying to look at the big picture and the overall output, is look at the rate metrics. A lot of people refer to them as route run metrics. Basically, what is a receiver doing when he runs a route? Being able to look at that smaller sample size helps us get a clearer picture of who the player actually is and what they can do on the field, not just how they benefit from the system that they're a part of. Let's look at Marquise Brown as an example of a player who had great underlying metrics, but never really was able to put it together on his team. The Greg Roman-led offense that we saw him playing in for 3 years focused on tight ends in the passing game. They also like to run the ball a lot. So Marquise Brown didn't get a ton of opportunity there. If you look at his target share, if you look at his targets per route run, and if you look at his yards per route run, he was in the top 15 pretty consistently for every single one of those seasons, but he never finished better than wide receiver 22. His 2 other seasons in the league, he was a back-end wide receiver 3. So even though his profile screamed that he was a great player, the production just wasn't there. But then in 2022, he was traded to Arizona, where they have this air raid system. They throw the ball a ton, and they focus on their wide receivers. There was also some stiffer target competition in Arizona, which caused his rate metrics to dip ever so slightly, but he set career highs in targets per game and fantasy output. He jumped from 6.9 targets per game to 8.9 targets per game. And if we just look at the stretch with Kyler Murray as his quarterback, he saw 10.7 targets per game and was the wide receiver 5 in PPR scoring. During those years in Baltimore, Dynasty managers were pulling their hair out with frustration, wondering why such a talented player couldn't translate to fantasy production. But savvy fantasy managers were saying, I'm going to invest in this elite profile and wait for things to come together. Basically what I'm saying is that player talent doesn't change all that often, player situations often do. Let's look at Kyle Pitts as an example of somebody who has an elite profile but hasn't really seen the production yet. I know, Kyle Pitts isn't a wide receiver, but the same principles apply. Last year, he had 7.6 PPR fantasy points per game, which ranked 22nd among tight ends. Not good at all. However, he was number 1 in targets per route run. He was number 1 in target share. He was number 1 in air yard share. The problem, he was 43rd in routes run. He was catching targets from Marcus Mariota, which were not good targets to try and catch. So when you're looking at the dynasty landscape, investing in a guy like Kyle Pitts is great because we don't know where he's going to be playing years from now, but we know that when he is on the field, he is an elite target earner and can do a lot with the targets that come his way. What happens if the Falcons decide to trade for Lamar Jackson or Aaron Rodgers unexpectedly? What if Desmond Ridder steps up and is an elite quarterback this year? What if the team trades up and gets a quarterback who turns into a stud this year? Or what happens if the Falcons decide that they want to trade Kyle Pitts and they trade him to the Los Angeles Chargers, where he can be a premier part of a very prolific offense? Then all of a sudden we're looking at a guy who draws a ton of targets, does a lot with those targets, and sees a hefty share of volume. So by looking at these rate metrics, what I attempted to do was look at wide receivers and put them into buckets of similar wide receivers in similar positions. You can find deeper explanations on all of this in the article that is linked in the YouTube description below. But let's start off with tier 1, and there's a player who is in this tier all by himself. Justin Jefferson has done more through his first 3 years than any wide receiver has in NFL history. Even if we prorate away the 2 extra games that he has had the benefit of playing in over the last 2 17-game seasons, he is still 500 yards ahead of anybody. We're talking Randy Moss, Terrell Owens, Odell Beckham Jr., Jerry Rice. It doesn't matter. Justin Jefferson has been smashing the competition. He's an elite target earner. He's great at contested catches. He led the league in red zone targets last year. He draws his targets deep downfield, and he makes plays after the catch. I don't know what else I can say about Justin Jefferson, but he belongs in tier 1 all by himself. The next tier of wide receivers are still very elite wide receiver ones, and some people might scoff at the omission of Ja'Marr Chase from the top tier, but he just simply isn't up to speed that Justin Jefferson is yet. However, these elite wide receiver ones are Ja'Marr Chase, CeeDee Lamb, and A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown is another example of a guy who had a fantastic profile, but playing on the lonely Titans offense didn't help him at all. But then when he was traded from the Titans to the Philadelphia Eagles, which were a powerhouse offense led by Jalen Hurts, we saw him set career highs across the board. Targets, receptions, yards, touchdowns. He put it all together and gave us an extremely productive NFL season. Now, Ja'Marr Chase, when you look at his underlying metrics, they're pretty close to what we've seen from Justin Jefferson, and he has a chance to vault himself into that tier next year if he can stay healthy and produce again this year. CeeDee Lamb got off to kind of a slow start in his career, but a lot of that had to do with the situation he was in. Dak Prescott was hurt, and he was playing with Ben DiNucci and Cooper Rush in a pretty anemic offense, but now we see him play in back-to-back full seasons with a healthy Dak Prescott, and all of a sudden, he's given us 120 targets and 1,100 plus yards every single season. That's the type of production we could expect going forward. Even if his situation does change and Dak Prescott's traded away or he ends up at a different team, those short-term blips aren't anything to worry about because CeeDee Lamb has already displayed a very elite profile that you can feel comfortable investing in. The next tier of wide receivers I'll talk about, I have pegged as fringe elite. These guys can move up or down quickly just as soon as this season. I'm looking at Amon-Ra St. Brown, DeVonta Smith, DK Metcalf, and Jaylen Waddle. Amon-Ra St. Brown actually tops the list because he has put up some phenomenal metrics through his first 2 years. He had a breakout at the end of his rookie season that I was kind of writing off for lack of target competition, but then he followed that up with a 27.8% target share in year 2 and has solidified himself as one of the best target earners in the NFL. DeVonta Smith is another guy that was getting knocked for the addition of A.J. Brown, but guess what? He had the 13th best target share last year despite that stiff competition, averaged over 27% target share throughout the entire season, and is somebody that you can confidently invest in whether you're rebuilding or contending. Jaylen Waddle is one that is a little bit tougher to gauge, but the production has certainly been there. Now, that production could be chalked up to a rookie season where he had no target competition and a year 2 season that was hyper-funneled through Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle, but looking at those underlying metrics do raise some concerns here. He was outside of the top 35 in targets per route run and in target share. Now, he was hyper-efficient with those touches, but historically, we see efficiency dwindle from players, and we want to invest in people who are instead earning a lot of targets. Now, Jaylen Waddle hasn't earned those targets yet, and that makes him one of the riskiest assets in this tier, but it is impossible to deny the production so far. T. Higgins is kind of in a similar spot to a lot of these guys. If you've noticed the theme so far, everyone in this tier has to deal with intense target competition. T. Higgins had a great breakout as a rookie season, and then Ja'Marr Chase joined the team. Even since Ja'Marr Chase has joined the team, T. Higgins has consistently been above a 20% target share, which we like to see. Now, the production lacks a little bit right now because of that stiff target competition, but T. Higgins has already displayed a strong enough profile that if he ends up in a better situation, he has the opportunity to finish as a top 3 wide receiver. Right now, the biggest hindrance to his production is the Ja'Marr Chase that is on the same offense with him. That leaves us with DK Metcalf, who unfortunately right now is probably getting pushed down draft boards because he's been in the league for 4 years and people grow tired of people once they've been in the league for a few seasons. But at the end of the day, he's putting up the same strong metrics that we're seeing from everybody else in this tier. And the difference is he was drafted at a very young age. Because of that, dynasty managers are starting to tire of him, but he is still at that fringe elite tier. If anything were to happen to Tyler Lockett, where Tyler Lockett and his 20+% target share disappears from Seattle's offense, DK Metcalf could instantly shoot up draft boards and become a top 3 dynasty wide receiver. The last 3 guys that I'd like to talk about are all bunched very similarly for the same reason. They are sophomores in the NFL. I'm talking about Garrett Wilson, Drake London, and Chris Olave. All three of these guys had the chips stacked against them in their rookie seasons. Garrett Wilson had to deal with a carousel at QB of Zach Wilson and Joe Flacco and Mike White, and despite that, he led all rookie wide receivers in yardage, and he finished as the offensive player of the year. So we've seen the production there, and he also displayed a great target share that makes us want to invest in him. Drake London actually has a case to be the wide receiver one of this class. He was on a terrible offense, catching awful targets from Marcus Mariota. Despite that, his target share of 29.1% was 5th best in the NFL. Only Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, and Jamar Chase were averaging a bigger slice of their team's offensive passing pie than Drake London was. So this is the exact type of player you want to invest in, because right now things aren't looking great for Drake London, but they are a quarterback away or a trade away from him exploding in value. And then Chris Olave displayed an elite air yard share. He also led all of the rookies in yards per target, but he was also victim of a not so great offense that kept him from really producing overall. So we're looking at three very talented young wide receivers in three very different but difficult situations that all gave us reasons to invest in them in year one. After that, there are still a lot of guys that you want to look out on your Dynasty roster. We're looking at some productive veterans. We're looking at guys that are just over that age 25 window where a buy window opens up and you can get them for cheap. We're looking at some young and intriguing guys like Jameson Williams and Christian Watson and Treylon Burks and Jerry Jeudy. Be sure to look in the description below where you can find a link to an article where I dive deep into all of these players. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already, be sure to give us a thumbs up, as that's going to help some other people find the video. Right over on the side of your screen, you can see some other videos that we have here on the Football Guys YouTube channel. And also be sure to subscribe at youtube.com/footballguys so you can see all of the video content that we have coming your way. youtube.com/footballguys.